So this is the calculus in Avengers Endgame, a movie that came out probably 3 years ago. Not sure. So what is Avengers Endgame about? It's essentially the sequel that follows Infinity War, Avengers Infinity War, which is essentially where the Marvel Universe heroes lost to the villain Thanos, and he was able to wipe out half the universe, which was his perceived solution to lack of resources, lack of providing for enough people. And the plot and basis of all the mathematical implications of the scenes that will be looked at are when they shrink and go quantum tunneling, quantum theory, wormholes, and how those can be implemented, and what exactly, there's limit functions and different partial differential functions that will be present. And I'll explain. And what exactly am I trying to explain is whether the time travel they use as a last resort solution, at least around the 1 hour mark in which they time travel, is plausible, and if it's truly a theoretical thing that could happen. And what relates this thing to project to calculus is that it'll involve a logistic function, many partial differentiable functions involving Einstein field equations, Schrodinger's equation, and the Planck scale. So these are a list of the topics that'll probably be involved and looked at. The science behind a wormhole, what exactly is it? The Planck scale and how it relates to the movie and why is it so important when doing these things. The choice of a Mobius strip in Endgame, which is a unique geometric shape that is really important to essentially creating this whole entire time travel. The microscopic universe and the unobservable realms within, which is essentially the quantum realm. Quantum mechanics and physics that are present within the movie, and how small is this quantum realm and is it possible to time travel? So what exactly is a wormhole in the context of quantum mechanics and physics? Most of the time you need a picture to describe this. It's really hard, but essentially it's a manifold of space-time on itself linking two ports within a universe or between two different universes, and that's all theoretical based since we have no way of proving this, but we can at least essentially guess and assume that's most of what quantum theory is, the assumption and theoretical limitations of what could happen. And essentially you have to have negative energy and mass to essentially stabilize it, but the main issue with that is that you have to keep all other energy out, and photons or energy and light is easily transmissible through wormholes because light can travel through it. And how wormholes come into play when talking about the calculus with Avengers Endgame. One of my theories was that they're using wormholes when they go into the quantum realm at a really small scale, because I found research that said primordial wormholes are essentially 10 to the negative 33 centimeters big when they're first forming. Although as our universe expands, it does increase the size. That increase is really minute and isn't really perceivable still or observable. So what exactly is quantum theory? Quantum theory is the theoretical limitations in which our classical physics can explain the world, in which we have to come up with new theoretical bases that can explain things on a much smaller scale. So why is it important to illustrate ideas that will be present? Because the whole time travel involving Avengers Endgame revolves around this idea that the quantum realm is a key factor of time traveling from one point in a universe to a separate universe branching off within a microscopic universe. So the quantum realm and quantum tunneling. So the quantum realm is this microscopic universe that is unobservable to people, and how do the Avengers get to it? Through quantum tunneling. What exactly is quantum tunneling? It is essentially the idea that you can shrink to a size, and as you do, your eigenvalue particle, which I'll talk about in the next slide, will decrease, and you will be transmissible through things. So classical physics will talk about how when you're going up a hill, you need enough energy to roll a ball up a hill, but quantum mechanics says that there is 1 out of the billionth scenarios where you will go straight through, and that's essentially what quantum tunneling is. So it's implemented through, I said that it's more related to chaos assisted tunneling, which is essentially where you're going to such a small scale that the rules of space-time is so contorted and disturbed that you're able to increase this rate in which you can travel through perceived walls of the quantum realm and the real world. So now we'll be actually getting to the math after establishing those. So how small did the Avengers get, or at what rate did they shrink? After taking it frame by frame, it was a 1 second interval in which this arrow shows right here. And I realized I took the 178 centimeters off the average height of a superhero, males and females. And then the limit was that, and then the B is just essentially 178 minus the size they go to, which is P0 of 10 to the negative 33, since that's the size they have to go through a wormhole, over 178, essentially getting this logistic growth, Y1. And I essentially just inverted it using a negative inverse, and then adding 178 is what I found can inverse into decay. And essentially, what does this data mean? It's essentially just showing how they're able to go from either really small all the way to really big. And you can see that, I think this is where quantum tunneling comes into play, where you have to be able to gather enough energy and use that energy to be able to jump shot yourself from one point to another in 1/10 of a second, in which they go from really small to their normal height, and from their normal height to a really small number. So the solution, time travel. What is a Mobius strip? So in Endgame, Tony Stark chooses an inverted Mobius strip, in which he says is a key factor of time travel, because no matter what path you follow, no matter where you go on a Mobius strip, inverted, any other like shape of distorted, you will always end back where you are, which is what this animation is showing. Tony Stark also points out that when time traveling, you're messing with the Planck scale. And what exactly is this Planck scale, and how is it relevant? I interpret it as almost like a limit function. That's not what this is, but it is a interpretation of how small you go before classical physics starts to break. So I'm seeing it as a limit function because it is taking the factor of all classical physics into the singular point in which they break. And then eigenvalues are essentially what happens when you go to this size, what happens when you go to a different size, how are your waves affected, which is a key part of quantum tunneling, because quantum tunneling is a wave process of going through a wall and basically becoming permissible through it, and increasing that rate by going really small through that theoretical 1 in a billion chance of going through it. So the explanation and unification of these ideas as a whole is essentially that in Avengers Endgame, they go to this Planck scale by decreasing, and by doing so, they find wormholes on the Mobius strip, and they're able to track themselves through, movie sci-fi magic, where they use a suit and a watch. But my main idea was that they're essentially using wormholes in a quantum realm to go through different universes. And looking at the other slide with the Mobius strip, it's a thin plate basically that wraps around or is kind of distorted. I think that thin plate is essentially the Mobius strip in which they travel from one universe to another. And that's how they're able to go from, say, 2022 to 2012 or 2018, because one of the theories is that wormholes don't just connect to our universe, but can also connect to many other universes, which is something that's explained. Is it truly plausible? Most likely not. I'll explain in the next slide some of the sci-fi stuff that's used that makes this really plausible within their universe. And will it potentially realistically ever exist in our world? I don't really believe so, because to be able to establish that, you have to find cosmic energy that they use, or exotic matter, on a much larger scale than what we've done. And that manipulates time and space on a way unprecedented before. So these are some of the holes that are filled by sci-fi. Pim particles are essentially cosmic energy that they're using to shrink and enlarge at such a rate that's insanely impossible for what we have right now. They also have multitude of energy sources like arc reactors, nuclear cores, and stuff like that that can power all this stuff. And another thing is the Infinity Stones, which is a multitude of cosmic energy that's able to do unrealistic and infinitely impossible things. And then one of the explanations in time travel. So in most movies in generic, when you change the past, you change your future or your past in the past. But as explained in Endgame, when you go in the past in your future, you were meant to go in the past. So your past before that can't change because you're now in the present. Essentially what that's saying is that you're always meant to go travel back in time, and that can't be changed. So in conclusion, ideas that can be taken away is that this movie involved logistic functions, limit notations of the Planck scale, and differential equations like Schrodinger's and EFE's or Einstein's field equations. That was why it's not feasible. Like I was saying, you need a multitude of cosmic energy to make this even plausible. And then my rating on the movie as a whole, even though the science is really skewed and doesn't really like represent what we can do right now or really any theoretical future, I give it a 5 out of 5 just for cinematic and everything. Even though it is a 3-hour movie long, it is definitely worth the watch. And any questions?